The rifle wasn't pointed directly at my daughter, not yet, but the way the man was holding it. A low and ready carry sent a sliver of ice straight through my heart. It was a clear and unambiguous threat. My daughter, Sarah, stood on the top step of her grandmother's porch, her arms crossed, her body language a perfect picture of calm defiance. On the lawn below, Beatrice, the president of the Whispering Oaks Homeowners Association, was practically vibrating with a kind of ecstatic rage. "This is your final chance," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. Her husband, Carl, the man with the rifle, took a half step forward, his knuckles white on the wooden stock. "You will sign these covenants and join the association, or you will be removed from this property as a trespasser. We will not have this blight in our community another day." I stood in the doorway behind Sarah, a helpless, terrified spectator to a drama that felt like it was spiraling into a nightmare. They were trying to intimidate us, to threaten us into submission with a firearm. My daughter, who had come here to grieve and to heal, was being held hostage on her own property. Beatrice's eyes were gleaming. She was a conqueror on the verge of final victory. She had us cornered and she knew it. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that insane standoff on a quiet suburban lawn, you have to go back to the beginning. My story really is a story about a house. Small, charming, slightly worn-down clapboard. House my mother lived in for 50 years. It was a simple, honest home on a beautiful, oak-studded acre of land. When my mother passed away 3 months ago, she left the house to her only grandchild, my daughter, Sarah. My name is George. I'm a retired high school history teacher. My life has been quiet, orderly, and, I like to think, reasonable. After my wife passed, Sarah became the center of my world. She's an incredible woman. She chose a path of public service, demanding career in law enforcement that I was endlessly proud of, but that I also worried about constantly. The biggest news of our lives had just happened a few weeks earlier. Sarah, after a long and grueling campaign, had been elected the new sheriff of our county. It was a monumental achievement. At 38, she was the youngest and the first female sheriff in the county's history. The election had just been certified. But her official swearing-in ceremony wasn't for another couple of weeks. She had this small, quiet window of time. A brief calm before the storm of her new responsibilities. She wanted to spend it at her grandmother's house with me, sorting through a lifetime of memories, preparing the old place for sale. It was supposed to be a quiet, contemplative time for us, a way to process our grief and prepare for the future. The problem was the house's location. Over the last 30 years, a massive upscale development called Whispering Oaks had sprung up around my mother's property. Her 1-acre lot was now a rustic island in a sea of identical beige McMansions with perfect chemically green lawns. My mother, a woman of formidable and stubborn character, had fiercely resisted all attempts to be bought out by the developers. Her property was in holding, a piece of land that existed before the HOA was formed and was never legally joined to it. She was exempt from their rules, their fees, their endless petty dictates. And this fact was a constant, festering sore for the HOA president, Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman who lived for order, but not the natural order of things. She demanded a manufactured, sterile perfection. She was the kind of person who would measure the height of your tulips with a ruler. To her, my mother's charming, slightly wild acre with its overgrown rose bushes and peeling paint was not a piece of history. It was a personal insult. For years, she had waged a cold war against my mother, a war my mother had largely ignored with a regal indifference that only fueled Beatrice's fury. With my mother gone and the house now in Sarah's name, Beatrice saw her chance. She saw a young new owner, likely unfamiliar with the property's unique legal standing. She saw an opportunity to finally conquer this last bastion of nonconformity and bring the property under her tyrannical control. Sarah and I arrived on a Saturday morning in my old pickup truck, the bed filled with boxes, cleaning supplies, and work clothes. We hadn't even unlocked the front door when a golf cart came zipping across the street and screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. It was Beatrice. She was holding what looked like a welcome basket. "Welcome to the neighborhood," said her voice, a symphony of false sweetness. "We were all so sorry to hear about your grandmother. She was a fixture. We are just so thrilled to have a new owner who will finally be bringing this property up to community standards and joining our wonderful association." She thrust the basket at Sarah. Inside, nestled among a few muffins and a bottle of cheap wine, was a thick, professionally bound book, the Whispering Oaks HOA covenants and restrictions, and a membership application form. A pen clipped helpfully. To the top, Sarah, who looked like any other young woman in her dusty jeans and faded university sweatshirt, took the basket with a polite smile. "Thank you, Beatrice. That's thoughtful of you," she said. "But I don't have any plans to join the HOA. I'm just going to be cleaning the place up to sell it." Beatrice's smile didn't just vanish, it curdled. "My dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's not really an option. All properties within the boundaries of Whispering Oaks are mandatory members. It's for the good of the community. For the property values." "This property was never part of the HOA," Sarah said, her tone still polite, but now with a new firm edge. "It's legally exempt. We won't be joining." Beatrice snatched the basket back out of Sarah's hands as if it were contaminated. "We'll see about that," she hissed, and sped off in her golf cart, leaving Sarah and me in a stunned silence. The first shot had been fired before we had even stepped inside. The next day, the first official notice was plastered to the front door. It was a fine for $200 for an unapproved property transfer without a pre-sale HOA compliance inspection. It was, of course, complete nonsense. The house wasn't for sale yet, and even if it were, the HOA had no jurisdiction. What should we do? I asked Sarah, the official-looking document making me nervous despite myself. "We do nothing, Dad," she said, crumpling it up and tossing it into a trash bag. "It has no legal weight, it's just noise." But the noise? It was about to get a lot louder. 2 days later, we rented a large industrial-sized dumpster for all the old furniture and junk we needed to clear out. We had it placed at the very end of the long driveway, near the street. Beatrice was on us before the delivery truck had even pulled away. She parked her golf cart sideways, physically blocking the driveway. "Absolutely not," she declared, marching towards us, her phone already out and recording. This monstrosity is a clear violation of a dozen covenants. It's unsightly, it's a safety hazard. It will attract vermin. I will not have this sitting in my community." "It's a dumpster, Beatrice," I said, trying to reason with her. "It's on our property and it will be gone in a week." "A week?" she shrieked. "Unacceptable. You have 1 hour to have it removed, or I will have it towed at your expense and fine you into oblivion." The situation was escalating. The dumpster workers were standing there looking uncomfortable. I felt my own temper starting to rise. But Sarah stepped in front of me. She walked calmly up to Beatrice. "Ma'am," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "this is our private property. The dumpster is legally placed. You are currently trespassing. If you do not move your vehicle and leave the premises immediately, I will call the sheriff's department and have you removed." There was something in Sarah's tone, a cool, professional authority that seemed to momentarily stun Beatrice. She stared at Sarah, then at the dumpster, then back at Sarah. She huffed, a sound of pure, frustrated rage, and stormed back to her golf cart. "You haven't heard the last of this?" she yelled as she sped away. That night, the real intimidation began. Beatrice's husband, a large, oafish man named Carl, whom she had appointed the head of neighborhood security, started making his presence known. He parked his oversized pickup truck across the street from the house and just sat there for hours, watching us. The message was clear. We were under surveillance. I was getting truly worried. This woman was unhinged. This was supposed to be a peaceful, healing time for my daughter, and instead, I had brought her into a war zone. I saw a new, hard glint in Sarah's eyes, a look I recognized from when she spoke about her work. She was no longer just my daughter. Cleaning out her grandma's house, She was Officer Thompson, assessing a threat. The next evening it got worse. Carl got out of his truck, walked brazenly onto our lawn, and started taking pictures of the house with his phone. He was documenting the peeling paint on the porch railing, the overgrown bushes, the moss on the roof building, a file for his wife's next attack. Sarah had had enough. She walked out onto the porch. "You were on private property," she said, her voice ringing out in the quiet twilight. "I'm telling you to leave now." Carl just laughed, a low guttural sound. "I'm the head of security," he sneered. "I go where I want. This whole neighborhood is my jurisdiction. This property is not in your neighborhood or your jurisdiction," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a register that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was the voice of command. "Leave, now." He hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by her tone. Then he spat on the driveway, a final gesture of contempt, and swaggered back to his truck. I felt a cold dread creep over me. These weren't just notices anymore. This was active, aggressive, and escalating harassment. I told Sarah we should call the sheriff's department right then and there. She put a hand on my arm. "Dad, let me handle this," she said, her eyes calm and focused. "The election results were just officially certified this morning. My swearing-in is next week. Let's just try to get through this. I don't want to pull any strings before I'm even in office. We can handle them," I reluctantly agreed. But I had a terrible feeling that we had passed a point of no return. Beatrice made her final move the next day. A courier delivered a letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was a formal, 24-hour ultimatum. It was pages of convoluted legal gibberish. But the threat was clear. Sarah was to sign the papers to join the HOA immediately, or the association would file for an emergency injunction. To have her evicted as an unauthorized occupant of a non-compliant and abandoned property. They were threatening to seize the house. It was a completely baseless, illegal threat, but it was terrifying to look at. It was designed to panic and intimidate, and it led directly to the final confrontation. The next afternoon, we were on the porch taking a break when Beatrice's golf cart came flying up the street, followed by Carl in his truck. They parked on the street and marched onto the lawn as if they were leading an army. Carl was carrying a heavy-looking hunting rifle, and that's how we ended up in a standoff. With Beatrice screaming her ultimatum, her husband holding a rifle, and me feeling a terror I had never known, Beatrice looked ecstatic. After years of being thwarted by my mother, she was finally about to conquer this last square of territory. She was about to win. Sarah didn't flinch. She looked at Carl and his rifle, then at Beatrice. "Ma'am," she said, her voice impossibly calm, "let me be very clear. By bringing a firearm onto this property and using it to threaten my father and me, you have just escalated this from a civil harassment issue to a felony. What you are doing is called aggravated assault, an armed criminal action." Beatrice let out a short, barking laugh. "Don't you dare quote the law to me, you little brat. We make the rules here. Quo is the head of security, and he is authorized to use whatever force is necessary to protect this community from trespassers like you." It was in that moment, as if summoned by the sheer madness of the scene, that a county sheriff's patrol car came cruising slowly down the street. Beatrice's face lit up with a look of pure vindictive joy. "Good. Authorities are here to back us up," she crowed. She had obviously called them, planning to use them as the final hammer to break us. The patrol car pulled up to the curb. 2 deputies got out. One was a young woman. The other was an older, seasoned-looking sergeant. He took one look at Carl holding the rifle, and his hand immediately went to his sidearm. "Sir, put the weapon down. Put it on the ground, now," he commanded, his voice a powerful baritone that cut through the tension. Carl, looking panicked, and out of his depth, fumbled with the rifle and clumsily laid it on the grass. Beatrice, meanwhile, descended on the deputies, a whirlwind of accusations. "Thank God you're here, Sergeant," she cried. "Arrest her," she shrieked, pointing at Sarah. "She's the one. She's a squatter. She's taken over this poor, abandoned house, and she's refusing to leave. We are the victims here. We're in fear for our lives." The sergeant, whose name tag read Miller, held up a hand to quiet her, his eyes never leaving the scene on the porch. He was a professional, assessing the situation. He looked at me, a scared-looking older man. He looked at the rifle on the ground, and he looked at Sarah, a young woman in a paint-splattered t-shirt and jeans, who was standing there watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. His gaze lingered on Sarah, his brow furrowed. He took a half-step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to place a familiar face from a long-forgotten dream. "Ma'am," he said, his voice suddenly hesitant, full of a strange disbelief. He wasn't talking to Beatrice. He was talking to Sarah. "Forgive me." "Sheriff-elect Thompson, is that you?" Beatrice's tirade cut off with a choked, strangled gasp. Her head whipped around to stare at Sarah. "Sheriff-elect?" The two words hung in the air, seeming to bend the reality around them. Sarah gave a small, tired nod. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," she said, her voice quiet. "Looks like we've got a bit of a situation here." The entire world shifted on its axis. Sergeant Miller's entire posture changed. He straightened up, his face a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and an overwhelming, profound respect.
"Oh."
He holstered his weapon. He then turned to face Beatrice, and the professional calm in his eyes was replaced by a look of pure, adulterated fury. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "do you have any idea what you have just done?" He tapped the body camera on his chest. "You have just been recorded on a sworn officer's camera, committing felony menacing. You have been recorded attempting to coerce a citizen with a deadly weapon. And you did it to the one person in this county you should have been most afraid to cross. That citizen," he said, his voice rising with each word, "happens to be my boss. The newly elected sheriff of this entire county." Beatrice's face imploded. The color drained away, leaving a pasty gray mask of horror. She looked at her husband Carl, who looked like he was about to be physically ill. The foundation of their world, their little kingdom of rules and intimidation, had just been vaporized. Sarah stepped forward off the porch, her authority now absolute and undeniable. She walked up to Carl, who was trembling, and then looked at Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant, please secure the weapon as evidence and place this man in custody." "Yes, ma'am," Miller said, a hint of awe in his voice. Sarah then turned to face Beatrice, and in a calm, clear voice that echoed across the silent, perfect lawns of Whispering Oaks, she began to speak. "Ma'am, you are also under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the two stunned deputies moved in to cuff a whimpering, protesting Beatrice, Sarah calmly, professionally, and officially recited their Miranda rights. The arrest of the HOA president and her husband by the sheriff-elect they were trying to intimidate became the biggest local news story of the year. The headlines were a thing of beauty. HOA Karen's standoff with the new sheriff. Beatrice and Carl were facing a raft of felony charges. Their lives as they knew them were over. The Whispering Oaks HOA was thrown into a state of utter chaos. The remaining board members, terrified of a lawsuit, held an emergency meeting. The next day, a formally drafted, deeply apologetic letter was hand-delivered to me, along with the written confirmation that my mother's property was, and always, would be exempt from their rules, their fees, and their very existence. Sarah's inauguration was a week later. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling with a pride so immense I thought it might burst. She took her oath of office. I thought about the nature of power. Beatrice thought power came from a title on a newsletter and a binder full of rules. She thought she could manufacture authority through intimidation and fear. She learned the hard way that true authority isn't something you can vote yourself into in a community clubhouse. It's earned. And it's wielded not to bully and control, but to serve and protect. She thought she was the law in her little kingdom. But she picked a fight with the person who actually is the law. For the entire county, we decided to keep my mother's house after all. It's become Sarah's quiet sanctuary, a place she can retreat to when the weight of her new job becomes too much. It's finally the place of peace it was always meant to be. Carl and Beatrice are awaiting trial, but I heard their son, a personal injury lawyer, just got himself elected to the new HOA board, and he submitted a proposal to the town council to have my daughter's private Driveway rezoned as a public access emergency vehicle turnaround.